such hits as Dope 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I've decided to steal my friend's joke. I am now Dope Emeritus, which means that I can show up whenever I want and kind of do whatever I feel like, which is amazing. Thank you, Carrie Ann. Bad jokes don't go away, they just get emeritus status. So, yeah, I am now the executive director of the Food Connection, and we have a budget, and I get some say in what happens, so I'm very happy that we could sponsor Dope, because the Political Ecology Working Group was a huge part of my graduate experience. I'm using past tense, but it's not true, I'm still dissertating, so I'm glad my advisor's not here. What do I want to say about it? The Food Connection, we are a new institute. We're an independent budgetary unit, which is a technical term I hadn't heard before, but we mirror the land-grant mission. We do instruction, outreach, and research to promote a vibrant and sustainable food and farm economy in our great Commonwealth of Kentucky. So that's what we do. I won't talk too much about it. I'd encourage you to check out our website just because there's some fun publications up there. We fund student opportunity grants for UK students in the room. We also, I just like to, I want to get it in like singles and throw it around, but we give money out wherever we can. I think, is Chai here? I think Chai got a student opportunity grant. Ooh, up in the rafters. So check out, there's some cool projects, cool things to look at, and all the great things that are going on in Kentucky. And I think that's all I need to say about my job. So thank you to Dope. I want to give one more huge thank you to the organizers. I sometimes think people don't realize that it is 100% student organized, 100% volunteer labor. For those of you who are grad students or ever been one, the fact that this is on top of classes and teaching assistantships. So, our organizers have been having to step out to facilitate, what do you call them? The little discussion sections, or what are they called? Yeah, well, anyway, so it's an incredible amount of work, so please can we give it up one more time? Give it up. Dope organizers. I've heard a few things this conference that helped me remember, as if I could ever forget how great Dope is, but I met a new friend from Florida who had said that this was her first Dope because someone had said, I went to this conference and it changed my life, and I was like, yeah, whatever, it's a conference. And now I'm here, and I realize it's right, which is, I think, a common story that comes out of Dope. So, in response to kind of Rebecca's amazing talk the first day, for those of you that it's your first time, I also heard someone mention, like, I came one year, and then it's been a couple years since I could be back because I have other conferences that I have to go to. It's hard to find funding. What if Dope became one of those conferences that you had to go to, and it became very reasonable to say to your departments, this is a space where these new ideas and new ways of being academics are emerging, and if this is the place where you have those great conversations, you stay up late at my house later drinking bourbon, I don't know, I'm just gonna put that out there. So think about it, please come back to Kentucky. And what else? Regarding the after party, since we're on that topic, get your apps out and figure out, pick up some beer on the way, but if you are 21 and over, because I'm not trying to lose my job on some MIP business, please join us, you're very welcome. The after party is at Sound Bar, which is just walking down the street. It'll be great. Please, 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 this is where some of the fun stuff happens. And we've got a great evening ahead of us. I tried to make our funding of Dope contingent on me being able to give the keynote, a new ethnographic piece I'm working on towards a minor in notchology, snacks as feminist praxis. But they more wisely chose Tracy Osborne. So, enjoy tonight, enjoy this evening. You maybe won't enjoy the morning as much, but that'll be all the better for it. And I don't know who I'm handing this mic off to. Come get it, or we're gonna get weird. There we go, yeah.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jennifer Taylor, and I am the Political Ecology Working Group's representative on the Student Sustainability Council. And like Lauren said last night, we fund a lot of really great environmental initiatives on campus, and we definitely consider DOPE as being one of those wonderful initiatives. It really has, as an undergraduate student, empowered me last year and this year to continue on in the field of geography and political ecology for graduate school. Just a couple things that I want to say. I think part of the reason why the SSC has funded the DOPE conference is because it has provided such an inspirational tool for not just the students and faculty on the UK campus, but also students and faculty across the United States and even across the globe. So I think that's incredibly powerful. And it also has been an amazing ability to really, or has the amazing ability to promote the motivation and continuation of this kind of knowledge and understanding that DOPE really tries to get to the root of. So we just wanted to thank you all for being here and being at UK, and this has just been an absolutely wonderful opportunity to help contribute to this wonderful event. So thank you very much.
Hello everyone, I'm Clay. I'm very honored to announce the award for the graduate paper competition this year. We had a number of entries. We thank you all for submitting, and we thank the judges for your participation as well. Very, very much appreciated. All right, well, without further ado, our winner this year is Ashley Denton for her submission, Spotted Owl versus Barrel Owl, a narrative policy framework analysis of the biopolitics of conservation. Is Ashley here? Hooray! We have a check for you. Ashley is a third-year PhD student in public affairs and policy at Portland State University and a National Science Foundation IGERT Fellow. Ashley has a Master's of Social Work degree from the University of Arkansas and a Bachelor's degree in Psychology and Studio Art from Taylor University. Through these degrees, she has the opportunity to engage in a broad range of research opportunities which have provided a unique perspective and collection of skills. Ashley's primary research interests deal with the role of boundaries, geographical, political, human, non-human, public, private, in achieving environmental action and in creating and valuing knowledge. Her dissertation work is on transnational environmental governance networks in the Pacific Islands, where she looks at power and authority within regional networks in order to better understand where the Pacific has succeeded and wherein there is still room to grow. So, once again, Ashley Denton. And now for the great Eric Huntley.
Hello, DOPE 2016. My name is Eric Huntley. I'm a second-year PhD student in the University of Kentucky's Department of Geography. I can't begin to match Lily's ability to get folks hype, and unlike Clay, I have neither money nor prizes to give you. Nevertheless, it's my distinct pleasure to stand here tonight and introduce Tracy Osborne, who will be giving the DOPE 2016 keynote address. Last May, after the DOPE dust had settled, a few organizers met to discuss who we might invite to stand on this stage / I guess open floor tonight. Perhaps first among our priorities was to invite a scholar whose practice insists on the urgency of political ecology and its potential to assemble new publics, new politics, and new worlds around those matters of concern to which political ecologists attend. We wanted a speaker that would point towards an intervention, a speaker whose theory touches ground, a speaker who does political ecology in public, a speaker dedicated to the idea that a theoretical life should also be a political and a public life. It is for these reasons that we invited Tracy Osborne to speak here tonight. Dr. Osborne is an assistant professor in the School of Geography and Development and director of the Public Political Ecology Lab at the University of Arizona. Her research investigates the political ecology of environmental markets, particularly carbon markets, and their implications for the lives and livelihoods of forest communities throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. Dr. Osborne received her PhD from the Energy and Resources Group at the University of California, Berkeley, completing her dissertation in 2010. She was offered a postdoctoral position at the University of Arizona and eventually an assistant professor post. She founded the Public Political Ecology Lab in 2011 with dual purposes in mind. First, the lab would function as a platform to broadcast perspectives informed by political ecology more widely through sustained engagement with new media and current events. Second, the lab would be exactly that, a lab, an experimental space in which scholars and students could experiment and tinker and find support for ways of doing work differently. So, what can this look like? The lab recently announced the Climate Alliance Mapping Project, a participatory action research and counter mapping project structured around an interactive map that displays overlapping layers of indigenous territory, fossil fuel reserves, protected areas, and stories drawn from communities whose livelihoods are threatened by fossil fuel extraction. The project is both participatory and public. A first version of the map goes live this spring with the hope that it functions as an organizing platform that draws us in, asks for our attention, opens discussions, builds activist networks, and influences policy. It is Dr. Osborne's dedication to finding and nurturing new pathways for political ecology that is so necessary, so urgent, and so compelling. Paul Robbins reminds us that political ecology is not so much a discipline as a community of practice. If this is true, and I think it is thanks to scholars like Dr. Osborne that this word, practice, on which we hang our hat, adapts, changes registers, and is allowed to meet another word, public, in this, the age of the Anthropocene. So please join me then in welcoming to the stage Dr. Tracy Osborne.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to thank all of the organizers of the 2016 DOPE conference who have done a fantastic job pulling this event together. And so please join me actually in sort of thanking them once again. The DOPE conference has become an important space for sharing ideas and further developing the field of political ecology. And the fact that it's student-driven is certainly a testament to the resonance political ecology continues to have now and bodes well for what I think is a critical frontier of the field and the subject of my talk today. So it's therefore an absolute pleasure and honor for me to give the 2016 Dimensions of Political Ecology keynote address. Today I'm going to present the concept of public political ecology and discuss why this moment of crisis and ecological anxiety, representative of the Anthropocene, is important for engaged scholarship and the dissemination of new ideas that have the potential to transform society in revolutionary ways. Much of this work is influenced by the ideas of Antonio Gramsci, particularly his writing on the philosophy of praxis, hegemony, and the role of the intellectual. I will also discuss innovations from public geographies around questions of relevance and engaging a wider world. I'll then discuss concrete examples from the Public Political Ecology Lab and particularly highlight a recent project that Eric mentioned, the Climate Justice Mapping Project, done in collaboration with environmental and indigenous organizations across the Americas. Almost 2 decades ago, in 1997, prominent environmental scientist and member of the Obama administration science team, Dr. Jane Lubchenco, gave her presidential keynote address at the annual meeting of the American Association of the Advancement of Science, in which she challenged scientists to adopt a new social contract. Lubchenco argued that due to human impact on the planet and unprecedented social and environmental changes, scientists should tackle the most pressing environmental problems and share those results widely with policymakers and the public. While she recognizes that all science and interdisciplinary thinking are needed, there's a clear emphasis on the natural sciences in her appeal. However, I would argue that communication about the environmental state of the environment and mitigation strategies from a natural science perspective alone will be incomplete unless framed within the context of broader political, economic, power, and social dimensions. In other words, the framework of political ecology. Therefore, I invite us to consider the social contract laid out by Dr. Lubchenco through what might be called public political ecology. There's a resurgence and renewed excitement in the field of political ecology. The field has long attracted scholars and students because of its interdisciplinarity, flexibility to analyze diverse environmental issues and concerns across multiple scales, and most importantly, its ethical and normative commitments. However, political ecology's more recent renaissance, I would argue, has been inspired by the recognition of interconnected and global environmental problems represented by the Anthropocene. It has been inspired by the failure of current apolitical approaches, such as market environmentalism, to fully understand, let alone solve, environmental challenges of the 21st century. While the critical perspective leveled by political ecology is important for understanding the contours, drivers, and more equitable solutions to the current environmental crisis, in the age of the Anthropocene, analyses that remain in the halls of academia will be inadequate to the task at hand. But instead, what is required is a public political ecology on a massive scale, and one that operates in the realm of praxis and consciousness raising, so that a political ecology perspective not only becomes part of the public debate on environmental change, but that it begins to transform the very consciousness of society, shaping environmental discourse and practice. Public political ecology as a framework for theoretically informed, engaged scholarship is and must be the next frontier of political ecology. A field and framework for understanding the complex and dialectic relationships between society and nature, political ecology recognizes that environmental issues are not simply biophysical problems that can be easily solved by markets or technological fixes. Instead, environmental problems across multiple scales are social and political economic issues shot through with power relations. While political ecology has been acknowledged and lauded for its commitment to social and environmental justice, its liberatory potential, as described by Pete and Watts, has yet to be fully realized in practice. This is because while political ecology is strong in critique that astutely deconstructs apolitical perspectives, the field has been criticized for only rarely providing alternative visions of development and recommendations for change. The realization of its liberatory potential is an important goal for public political ecology, which combines a Gramscian political ecology and public geographies and is animated by the environmental concerns representative of the Anthropocene. So we are living in a unique moment in the age of the Anthropocene, an age in which the cumulative impact of humans on the planet threatens to destabilize the self-sustaining dimensions of Earth systems. It marks the end of the Holocene, which began 12,000 years ago, and which following the last ice age provided the necessary climate stability and warmer conditions for development of agriculture and complex civilizations. It also marks a powerful shift in human-environment relations that is both literal and symbolic. As a metaphor, the Anthropocene likens humans to plate tectonics in its impact and influence on Earth systems function. And while there's a growing body of literature on the subject, there are 3 points I'd like to make to highlight, to highlight with regards to the Anthropocene. First is that the Anthropocene is a bit of a misnomer in that it's not human species per se, but the role of capital that has largely driven ecological change. Second is that the Anthropocene represents a crisis that has produced ecological anxiety, which makes the dissemination of new ideas possible. And finally, how we understand and practice environmental stewardship in an attempt to restore Earth systems must be based on a political ecology approach. A number of scholars have argued that the ecological disruption inherent in the Anthropocene is less associated with humans as a species and more accurately reflective of capitalism as a primary driver of environmental change, leading some scholars to advocate for the term Capitalocene. The start date of the Anthropocene supports the argument of capital accumulation as a central driver. Paul Crutzen, Nobel Prize-winning atmospheric chemist who popularized the term, and others link the Anthropocene start date to the 1780s and the invention of the steam engine, which catalyzed the Industrial Revolution and advanced capitalism. The second stage of the Anthropocene, called the Great Acceleration, stretching from 1945 to 2015, marks a period of rapid economic growth, urbanization, and the expansion of agriculture and industry. The Great Acceleration maps onto the development project, the post-World War II project of third world intervention that emerged in the context of decolonization. Gillian Hart refers to the development project as Big D development, which he argues is inextricably linked to Little D development, or the development of capitalism. The development project facilitated the export of a particular form of Western fossil fuel-based development to the countries of the global South in the name of modernization and poverty alleviation. It also facilitated the massive expansion of markets to the developing world in order to resolve crises of capitalism through what David Harvey called the spatial fix. The hegemony of this capital-centered model of development is the basis of the Anthropocene's takeoff and acceleration. According to Robbins and Moore, the Anthropocene has created an ecological anxiety disorder for the scientific community, who fear both the extent of human influence on the planet as well as normative values that must now guide science. I would argue that we can also see a certain ecological anxiety in the broader public, particularly the youth, who recognize something is terribly wrong, and current environmental strategies that emphasize market solutions or individual action alone have been woefully insufficient. This anxiety, stemming from the Anthropocene, provides the train on which the dissemination of new ideas becomes possible. From a fascist prison in Italy, Gramsci wrote, and I quote, "It may be ruled out that immediate economic crises of themselves produce fundamental historical events. They can simply create a train more favorable to the dissemination of certain modes of thought and certain ways of posing and resolving questions." What this conjunctural moment makes clear is that it's not so much an economic crisis alone, but the ways in which the ecological and economic crises are deeply interconnected. This conjunctural moment also provides the grounds on which the dissemination of new conceptions of the world may be possible. This shift in consciousness is critical for thinking about Earth system stewardship, which scholars have identified as the third stage of the Anthropocene. Earth system stewardship begins now, in the year 2016, and stems from the growing awareness of human impact on the planet and desire to mitigate harm. The Anthropocene opens up an invitation to choose a new way of relating to the Earth based on stewardship and an ethic of care. As extreme measures such as geoengineering have been proposed as a highly uncertain but necessary practice of Earth stewardship, it is clear that the form of the stewardship matters and has critical implications, whether driven by technology, markets, or a fundamental shift in our relationship to nature. Earth stewardship must be driven, therefore, by a political ecology perspective that draws in part from post-humanism and multinaturalism traditions, which challenge nature-society dualisms and emphasize the need for an ethical response to the Anthropocene. Although not often recognized in much of the post-human literature, Earth stewardship ontologies and epistemologies continue to exist within many indigenous cultures and rural social movements such as La Via Campesina. While certainly diverse, the more bioculturally oriented traditions and movements can provide important insights for alternative forms of governance, the kind based on collective action and ethics that protect local environments from unsustainable practices. However, to date, more than human geographies have been rather silent on political economy and the role of neoliberal capitalism with regards to the Anthropocene. Given the centrality of the Industrial Revolution and capitalism in the unfolding of the Anthropocene, a relational political ecology approach that engages centrally with political economy and politics is crucial. A political ecology of the Anthropocene, therefore, recognizes the fallacy of nature-society divide and calls into question not so much the role of humans as a species on the planet, but the implications of a particular worldview and set of practices inextricably linked to capitalism. This approach must be at the heart of Earth stewardship, inform related action, and reach a broader public. The public turn in geography can be instructive in developing a public political ecology. While geography has long exhibited a more practical orientation, The public turn was inspired by Alexander Murphy's 2005 AAG presidential address, in which he called for greater visibility of geographers in social and political debates. Political geography is the result of an ongoing debate about the discipline's relevance that began in the late 1960s and early 1970s, largely by critical human geographers. Relevance is broadly understood as the extent to which academic research reaches beyond the academy to impact the larger world. And of course, demonstrating the relevance of our research has been increasingly important under neoliberalism. Scholars have often discussed relevance in terms of two streams of engaged scholarship: applied policy-oriented research and scholar activism working with grassroots social movements. The field of policy geography is distinguished from public geography in that knowledge is instrumental and serves the needs of a particular state client. In the field of public geography, the knowledge produced is reflexive, serves designated publics, and is an ongoing dialogue with public debate. According to Doreen Massey, policy engagement may not necessarily be the most effective way of making our research relevant, but instead engaging with a broader public in the form of social movements, for example, and participating in a more embedded way within civil society can be particularly productive. Social media tools and technology are also critical in public geography and represent a form of digital praxis which can facilitate timely interventions and create new and empowered relationships between academics and activists. But whether policy or publicly oriented, the goal, according to Don Mitchell, remains the same, and I quote, "to make the world a better place, as corny as that sounds," end quote. And as Ward astutely acknowledges, public and policy engagement are not mutually exclusive in that today's public engagement may turn into tomorrow's policy reform. However, relevance and engaged scholarship are deeply political, and we must ultimately ask the question raised by David Harvey and others of whose interests are served by our research. While some scholars have advocated for greater engagement of geographers in order to shape intellectual agendas and public debates, Castry suggests, and I also agree, that not all geographers should go public, but should engage only if they believe they have meaningful research to share. This, of course, goes for political ecologists as well. In fact, there are multiple challenges involved in doing public scholarship. Academic promotion and tenure requirements often do not recognize engaged scholarship, and therefore it's often conducted by mid-career and senior faculty. Engaged scholarship requires a significant amount of time, and also academics fear scholar activism may somehow taint their scholarship as non-objective and therefore attempt to separate the gaze from action. However, as many scholars have indicated, the neutrality of research is a myth, and instead we must be more explicit about the political positions and commitments that inform our work. Nevertheless, despite the challenges, scholars recognize the importance of engagement because of the high stakes involved, particularly in the context of the Anthropocene. Furthermore, some scholars argue that given the stakes, our training, access to information, and relative freedom of expression, academics have a moral and social responsibility to engage more broadly. Public political ecology fully adopts this moral and social responsibility and draws on the training and expertise of its scholars for political education and social change. Public political ecology is a concept used to describe theoretically informed engaged scholarship from a critical political ecology perspective as a vehicle for social and environmental justice. While it seeks to be relevant, it does so not primarily in the form of planning and policy per se, but in the realm of education and consciousness raising, with the understanding that an aware and conscious public can change the terms of politics and more effectively advocate for progressive policies and embedded markets. Inspired by the work of Gramsci, recognizing that everyone is an intellectual, public political ecology aims to transform common sense into good sense through education and alliance building across multiple arenas. Drawing on the philosophy of Praxis, public political ecology operates in the ideological and cultural spheres and involves a powerful role for intellectuals. Intellectuals provide the innovation of thought and authority necessary for fostering the critical and coherent thinking generative of political change. This linkage between politics and education is the heart of hegemony. Gramsci saw hegemony as the terrain of struggle in which dominant groups maintain power by securing a substantial degree of popular consent. Crises often catalyzed the disintegration of what he called bourgeois hegemony, where bourgeois interests are represented as the interests of all, and these crises then open space for subordinate groups to lead. Leadership comes not from leadership comes not from a particular class, but from a historic bloc, which involves an important role for intellectuals who provide social and moral authority. Intellectuals, particularly of the organic variety, support alliance building across multiple groups, provide leadership of society through education, and articulate a broad vision for change that generates new conceptions of the world. Recognizing this role of the intellectual, there are three key components to public political ecology. The first is critical pedagogy and engaged scholarship. The second, popular political education in the domain of civil society. And the third, alliance building among and between academics and particular publics that might include social movements, state actors, communities, and local businesses. Pedagogy is not a topic well traversed by political ecology, and likewise, scholarship on critical pedagogy has been critiqued for its failure to actively engage ecological questions. Nevertheless, a few scholars have identified critical pedagogy as an important realm for political ecology, as students represent an obvious public for social change. According to Lucy Jarros, service learning is an important pedagogical tool in political ecology that makes the field more concrete for students by anchoring theory to local political ecology issues. In addition, the science shop model, where students and faculty conduct research directly relevant to communities and social movements, can provide benefits for all groups involved. Science shops are entities often based at universities that provide scientific or technical knowledge to civil society groups in response to expressed research interests and needs. The participatory nature of research distinguishes science shops from other mechanisms of knowledge transfer, where diffusion of knowledge is often one way from academics to the public. As demands for university research in support of industrial and commercial development have expanded in the neoliberal era, addressing research interests of citizens and civil society are increasingly important. The science shop model, which is quite popular in Europe with about 60 science shops throughout the continent, is only just starting to take hold in the United States. As a model of engaged scholarship, science shops provide a clear access point for community-based organizations to request research support and can empower marginalized communities with the rigorous independent scholarship that can then inform local and regional decision makers. Other pedagogical tools for a public political ecology includes participatory research and mapping, decolonizing methodologies, and ethics of public engagement. Public political ecology also recognizes the moral imperative of scholars to engage in public debates. Academics have both the training and legitimacy to speak to a variety of environmental issues and contextualize them historically and geographically. Popular education is therefore centrally concerned with education outside of formal academic spaces. Gramsci saw political education in the arena of civil society as a critical terrain in struggles over hegemony, and one in which intellectuals play a crucial role. While traditional intellectuals are focused on advancing academic debates or operate within existing ideological paradigms, new and organic intellectuals provide innovation and leadership necessary for social change. They also play an important role in transforming popular consciousness and diffusing ideas so that they become new ideologies and coherent conceptions of the world. Public political ecologists are representative of these new and organic intellectuals. Public political ecologists are also a type of public intellectual, in the sense that they are scholars who engage non-academic publics, address matters of public concern, offer their opinions on the state of the environment and society, and in the words of Edward Said, and I quote, challenge and defeat both an imposed silence and the normalized quiet of unseen power in public affairs, end quote. However, the term public intellectual conjures a certain discomfort as its self-descriptor, resulting in the hesitation of many scholars to assume such a seemingly grandiose position. Therefore, I would argue we need to reconceptualize the idea of public intellectual in ways that challenge the notion that only a few authoritative scholars in the discipline or field can speak, and recognize that we can all engage in public debates based on our knowledge and expertise. This would support Gramsci's view that in the building of hegemony, profound social and moral authority is required, and it's not from a single source, but leadership should be exercised from a diversity of sites and a diversity of scholars. The more we engage the public from a political ecology perspective as scholars in a community of practice, the more we begin to shift the public debate. An example of how popular political education might be carried out is the massive open online course, or the MOOC. MOOCs have become a growing platform for distance learning. Unlike other online courses, MOOCs can serve tens of thousands of learners across the world with various levels of knowledge on the subject, and they tend to be shorter in duration, around 7 weeks. And courses are also provided low cost or free of charge. Critics argue that there's a high dropout rate, limited personal interaction with the instructor, and there's little motivation on the part of participants due to anonymity and lack of offered credits or certificates. While MOOCs are certainly no substitution for traditional classroom education, they can certainly serve other purposes of improving access to increasingly cost-prohibitive education and provide ongoing education to interested publics. Geographers are beginning to experiment with MOOCs, including political ecologists Karen Bacher and Paul Robbins. MOOCs allow instructors to bring educational material outside the classroom, reaching broader audiences. And by its very nature, the large platform, no or low financial cost to learners, and short time frame, MOOCs can be a valuable tool for public political ecology. Fostering alliance building across various groups and social movements is another aspect to which a Gramscian-inspired public political ecology can contribute. Gramsci was committed to understanding strategies for uniting different class groups and types of struggles in an effort to establish progressive leadership over hegemony. Groups such as environmental NGOs, indigenous organizations, university fossil fuel divestment campaigns, climate justice movements, as well as prominent religious figures such as Pope Francis and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, have been quite vocal and active in mobilizing around climate change. The 2014 People's Climate March in New York, for example, brought together a diverse set of stakeholders and groups, including environmental, labor, faith-based, environmental justice, climate justice organizations. With a clear understanding of the political ecology of climate change, alliances can be forged that produce more progressive outcomes and benefits beyond what any of these groups can accomplish alone. While to date such alliances in the context of climate change are only just beginning to emerge, considering the shared but differentiated impacts in marginalized communities of the global north and south, an alliance could significantly strengthen the efforts of largely independent struggles. According to Gramsci, and I quote, "It will be said that what each individual can change is very little, considering his strength. This is true up to a point, but when the individuals who want the same changes, and if those changes wanted are rational, the individual can be multiplied an impressive number of times and can obtain a change which is far more radical than at first sight ever seemed possible," end quote. Facilitating alliance building, supporting critical pedagogy and engaged scholarship, and fostering popular education are important goals of the Public Political Ecology Lab. Okay, so you've heard a little bit about the Public Political Ecology Lab. in the introduction, in Eric's introduction. But it's a experimental space. It's a collaborative effort. While based at the University of Arizona, we've definitely sort of welcomed and incorporated work and in the form of blogs, videos from many different scholars. The mission is essentially dedicated to the practice of theoretically informed engaged scholarship from a political ecology perspective as a strategy for social and environmental justice. There are two main goals. One is to make the work of political ecologists more accessible to a broader public through blogs, through photo essays, short videos. And the second goal is to sort of provide resources to scholars and students of political ecology interested in the practice of engaged scholarship. And the lab was launched in 2011 based on a recognition that students who are very interested in environmental issues, sort of operate from this idea that individual action alone will save the planet. Either recycling, it's often very consumption oriented. I teach a large undergrad class of about 150 students called Environment and Society, and in a lot of ways they're a barometer for consciousness, U.S. consciousness around environmental issues. So it's often very sort of consumption oriented and not necessarily looking at these sort of larger, broader political economic sort of structural changes that a political ecology approach would like lead us to helps us understand. So in a lot of ways, this lab sort of grows out of a need to sort of speak to this broader public. So we have a web presence, and the various components are blogs, as I mentioned. We have special focus blogs that often speak to timely, environmental issues. We have a series where political ecologists are able to sort of speak to the ways in which they practice engaged or public political ecology. And we also have sort of a version of a science shop, where we're able to respond to the research needs of various organizations. This piece on RED, sort of the Indigenous Peoples and RED report, was sort of a project that responded to a request to understand what are some of the key issues and concerns facing Indigenous peoples regarding market-based climate change forestry projects. And we launched this report prior to COP20 in Lima. The organization that requested this research was based out of Peru. So these are a couple of examples of our special focus blog series. So we've had one on RED and the California carbon market, on the political ecology of bordered spaces, on some of the concerns around the Bowman expedition and the mapping of indigenous lands, but also we had one on political ecologies of extractive industries and indigenous peoples. And I just want to sort of highlight this one on RED Plus and the California carbon market because we launched it in the spring of 2013, just when sort of the governor, the state of California, and a RED working group were trying to think through sort of the local, what these what do they call safeguards and local benefits, and what that might mean for places like Chiapas. So if this was a way for scholars who've been looking at some of these questions for long periods of time to be able to weigh in, and before the meetings, some of these meetings took place. So really the idea is to be able to sort of speak to timely events. And we also have a series of videos. So you'll know a lot the work of you'll recognize the work of a lot of these scholars. We've read a lot of these scholars in our classes. We sign them into our classes. We draw on their work. But it's really interesting to see and understand the ways in which these scholars also practice engaged or public political ecology. And I think there are a lot of really important lessons for all of us as political ecologists. Also, to your question about the resources. So we also have a set of resources on engaged scholarship, pedagogy and methods, and political ecology and praxis. We also have a certain number of links, so certainly to the University of Kentucky working group, the political ecology working group, the Untitled group working out of Europe, mapping resources, participatory action research, media, art, storytelling. So definitely check out the website if you haven't already. And I also want to sort of speak a little bit about a relatively new project. This is the climate justice mapping project that you've probably been hearing about, called the Climate Alliance Mapping Project. It involves a number of faculty and graduate students at the U of A. Two of our graduate students working on this project are here, Remy Franklin and Stina Jansen. And we're working in collaboration with a number of organizations, environmental and indigenous organizations, particularly Amazon Watch, who has been sort of pulling together an alliance of about 50 organizations in an Americas-wide initiative to advance climate equity. And all of these organizations have they have a campaign. They have various campaigns to keep fossil fuels in the ground. They're, from the Arctic to the Amazon. Also, some of the groups are working on tar sands issues in Canada. But they all basically have campaigns to keep fossil fuels in the ground within their region. But the idea was how to sort of build these broader alliances to support the work of these groups. And obviously, we are academics, so we're also sort of trying to discuss some of these issues within the broader science, within the broader sort of knowledge and science around carbon budgets. And so we know, based on the IPCC reports, that we've used about 65% of our carbon budget that's compatible with a 2-degree Celsius goal. That means we only have 35% of this carbon budget left. Some scholars have argued that because, knowing that we actually sort of have very little of this sort of remaining carbon budget, that we need to maintain something like almost up to 80% of known fossil fuels underground. There was a recent article that was published in Nature in 2015 by 2 scholars from the University of College London that recognized we need to maintain a significant amount of fossil fuels underground and use an economic calculus to sort of argue where those places should be. Then arguing that they should be in places where the costs of production are lowest. But based on the work that we've been doing with Amazon Watch and other environmental and indigenous organizations, we're using a different value system to understand where fossil fuels should remain underground. So we're creating 2 maps. We started with an Amazon map, and we're going to build this map out to the larger Americas that have a number of layers. It will to help us identify the priority areas for keeping fossil fuels underground. So these are the main layers, the fossil fuel reserves, protected areas representing ecologically important zones, indigenous territory representing culturally important zones, and the digital story component, which I think is the most exciting. To be able to allow communities and individuals in their own words, from the Amazon to the Arctic, to be able to communicate in their own words their experiences with fossil fuel development. So we created an Amazon map. We started with the Amazon, and we shared this with Amazon Watch prior to COP21. And so this map highlights fossil fuel reserves as well as proposed and existing development. As you can see, much of the proposed and existing development is within the western Amazon. Some of these areas, including an area called the Sacred Headwaters, are some of the most highly biodiverse areas of the Amazon. We've also mapped indigenous territories and conservation areas representing culturally and ecologically important zones. These we've identified based on the work with these various organizations as priority areas for keeping fossil fuels underground. So when you layer those on top of one another, you can see that really much of where the fossil fuel extraction and development is taking place, much of this area represents sort of these priority areas. So much of the Amazon really is high priority for unburnable carbon. While we definitely have been working closely with a lot of, the organizations that on the previous slide, we certainly could not have done this without a significant amount of data, and this is just data collected from the Amazon. Okay, so in conclusion, I'd like to circle back to where I started in this talk, the social contract. Although Jane Lubchenco advocated for a new social contract for science almost 2 decades ago, this contract has yet to be fulfilled. It has been thwarted by institutional failure to reward such action and attempted efforts of public science that continue to treat humans and nature in dualistic terms as separate entities. The Earth stewardship concept offers a promising contribution to the social contract through its emphasis of the deep interconnection of people and their environments, value of both scientific and traditional forms of knowledge, and consideration of both politics and ethics. A political ecology approach, however, contributes a powerful political economic perspective, which I've argued is important for analyses of the Anthropocene. Making this perspective more accessible to a broader public, training students to conduct theoretically informed, engaged scholarship, and supporting various groups, organizations, and social movements in alliance building is the heart of public political ecology and essential for Earth stewardship in the age of the Anthropocene. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tracy. There was a lot to think about, and I was hung up on one very minor dimension of the exciting things you were talking about. So I have a question about gender divisions of labor. Because the project you're developing is so exciting, and I noticed a contradiction as you were doing those cool word clouds, because there were different ways of framing and thinking about how to organize public research, except the one that came last, which called itself public, had the names of 4 individual men on it. So an Alexander, an Andrew, a George, and a Stephen were made it onto the word cloud. And I was so appalled by that I didn't forget their names. So I have a question about what you've learned about doing, yeah, it was the other one, the MOOC.
Okay.
2 individual universities also made their names on there. And so I have a question about what you've learned about doing public research while trying to challenge all of the forms of oppression, including the one in which the people doing the hardest work are reproducing their own dispossession and others are accumulating.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I did not make the word clouds. But, in part, we're working very closely with indigenous organizations and social movements. I mean, well, so we're really taking some of our guidance on sort of how to move forward from them. A lot of the organizations, a lot of the groups that we're working with in Ecuador, in particular, there's like significant leadership there's significant women's leadership. But this is a new field, and I think that's exactly the direction that we need to also push some of this. You know, I mean, we've definitely been able to do, I mean, that's the beauty of political ecology, right? I mean, we're always, you know, there are always new frontiers. I mean, sort of early on, there was sort of the you know, feminist political ecology, the work of Diane Rochelot. It's now been sort of really thinking about how we bring in sort of, how we think about it through intersectionality. There's been the work of Charlene Millette on sort of post-colonial political ecology. And so that's the idea, that this is just sort of asking us, all of us who do political ecology, whether it's sort of the drawing on post-colonial theory, whether it's doing sort of more of a feminist sort of critique, that there's space for all of us to make this public. But I agree. I mean, I think that's something that we should, you know, I mean, I'm just, this is one frontier, but it definitely doesn't preclude that work that you're suggesting.
Thank you for your presentation. So you mentioned, I'm not sure if it was sci-shops or science shops about having applied work. And I think I'm not the only undergrad who sort of thought of something like that. And then we mentioned people that are like, you're crazy, that doesn't happen. So where can we find good resources on that? Or working examples in the US, but I mean, you mentioned some in Europe as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, science shops are, as I mentioned, they're very popular in Europe. And it's surprising, there are only, I think, about 3 of them currently in the United States. There's one in Berkeley, I think there might be one in Wisconsin-Madison. The one in Berkeley is actually quite new. But you know, and there's also some literature, there's some scholarship on science shops as well that you can check out. I don't know if we have it up on the webpage yet. But we've actually been trying to create one out of the U of A, also sort of linked up with the Public Political Ecology Lab, and you know, sort of in a more formalized way. But it is sort of surprising because in some ways it's, you know, there's so many undergrads and particularly grad students who have a general sense of what they might want to work on. Let's say they want to work on, you know, sort of, they know they want to work on water issues in Chile. You know, I mean, when I was doing my field work in Chiapas, I mean, there were so many folks who sort of, you know, sort of raised, oh, I would really love to sort of understand this. And, you know, when you have already a sort of, you know, trajectory of your work, it's really difficult. But if there was you know, a portal or sort of a clearinghouse of this information that would allow graduate students, undergrads, you know, to be able to sort of identify, okay, if I'm interested in Chile and water, here are a whole set of organizations that need this research to be conducted, and you know you'll have some support. Also, you know, recognizing that it's sort of, you know, it's you know, it's going to be, it's independent research, so they don't necessarily can't necessarily direct how you conduct that research, but just sort of a space in which that happens. And in some ways, you know, I feel like we need that more than ever now. And there's a need. I mean, you know, both for grad students who are on the Climate Alliance Mapping Project are in some ways doing a type of, you know, or in a lot of ways are engaged in research that meets the needs of some of the organizations that they're working with. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's less rigorous in any way, but it definitely provides a much needed service to, you know, of research to some of these organizations that wouldn't ordinarily be able to access that, or would have to access that at a very high cost.
Hi, that was a fascinating talk, so thank you. I'm right in the middle.
Okay.
Hi. I have a question about publics, actually. So I think you just, in response to another question, said something sort of offhand about publics are, you know, the space for everybody, but publics can be, right, quite divided. There are multiple publics in the US right now, maybe. So I'm kind of curious, in this work, are you trying to build new publics? And if so, how are you doing that, and what kind of publics are you trying to build? Or are you trying to reach existing publics out there and sort of,
Yeah. You know, definitely, like, we recognize, I mean, I recognize that there are various publics, right? So it is about really paying attention to, like, the audience. And in some cases, you know, the audience might be social movements. In other cases, like with that the blog, we were really sort of speaking to some of the policymakers around, who are about to make this decision. So definitely sort of with this understanding that there are various publics, so yeah, I mean, in some ways, all of those, we're really, it's sort of like an invitation to sort of make our work sort of speak to, I mean, I'm not quite sure what you're working on, but I can imagine that there may be, a need to speak to sort of just even a more general sort of public through social media, through sort of blogs, through short videos. And the idea is that while there are, and again, sort of drawing on my experience in the classroom, I just feel like there are so many, there's just this sort of understanding that in order to make environmental change, that there are very sort of prescribed ways of doing that are still very much connected to the existing political economic structure. And that is very problematic because if you're sort of expending all of your energy in a way that is not necessarily going to produce sort of long-term effects, then that information sort of needs to be out there. And so again, it's not necessarily just this project. This is really an invitation for all of us, depending on what it is that we're working on, who those publics are. I mean, in some ways, Paul Robbins, like, we've interviewed him, and he sort of talks about scientists as publics, So, I definitely recognize that this diversity of publics, and it really depends on what it is that we happen to be working on, who's the audience that we want to reach, and put that information out in a form that is useful. And the idea is, again, it's not just, the idea is that it's not take place only through the lab, but that we really, based on our own work, based on timely events, be able to sort of have a way, or at least, an inclination, or sort of the motivation to sort of to reach out in any way that we see, that makes sense.
Hi Tracy, over here. Thanks so much for your talk. I learned a ton. I'm really excited about public political ecology as a project. I have a question, just thinking practically about some tensions that you face in this kind of work. Tensions between the limiting conditions that you face in the institution of the University of Arizona and within the wider institution of the state of Arizona, and funding issues, political pressures, and maybe one form of these tensions that I'm thinking of is in thinking of how under neoliberalism the state rolls back public services. Is there a danger, or do you think about dangers of ways that a public-oriented political ecology project could be kind of filling in the gaps of reduced state public service kind of functions? And then the other side of that question is how would you connect with groups in your alliance building that are actively seeking to end capitalism and the state and settler colonialism? You mentioned indigenous groups, but I wonder if in your alliance building you're also seeking to connect with like explicitly anti-capitalist kind of groups, and the tensions back with your relations with the state.
Yeah. Obviously Arizona, there's challenges in terms of funding for education. And, but, in terms of sort of, the support for this type of project at the U of A actually has been, it's a land-grant university, right? So there's a long history of engagement with stakeholders. So we also have a mission, a new mission, relatively new mission for 100% engagement. So, obviously there are a lot of ways that U of A is engaging, not necessarily this, but you know, I think there's this interest in outreach and sort of engagement that allows us to do this type of work more easily than probably in other institutions. In terms of the funding, I mean, you know, it has been challenging, to be honest, sort of accessing funding for this type of work at the U of A. So more increasingly, we've been seeking funding through foundations. It's certainly going to be looking at NSF. Actually, the Climate Alliance Mapping Project was largely funded through the Switzer Foundation, the Family Foundation for Environmental Leadership. We have gotten some from the Institute of the Environment for graduate student support. And, you know, but we're, you know, there's a lot of interest in this type of this work. So, you know, I mean, university funding is always challenging. I mean, in some ways, it's just sort of the nature of the beast. So I don't know, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily because of this, but it's, you know, we're trying to deal with that problem. We're working through that in other ways. In terms of how we, like, sort of the organizations that we're engaged with, if we're engaged with organizations that have sort of more of an anti-capitalist position, I mean, I don't know if I would say in any explicit way, but certainly we've been working with some organizations that are concerned about, you know, fossil fuel development. And actually, if you have an argument to keep fossil fuels underground, I mean, that obviously is very deeply tied with capital, right? So, I wouldn't say in an explicit way at all, but, you know, it's definitely, you know, how we you know, sort of we don't necessarily actively seek out these relationships. They sort of kind of just emerge, or through relationships with graduate students, or through, yeah, I mean, they sort of emerge. It's not like it's sort of the need to actively seek them out. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Hi, Tracy. I have two quick questions. The first one is about the kind of conditions of possibility for gaining authority in public arenas. And at times you switch between kind of public scholarship and action-oriented scholarship, and to me they're quite different. And the public scholarship in our discipline is kind of like the great white man, and that's not who's doing action research. And then the second idea about this too is this idea of a science shop, which often requires kind of technical skills at the same time that we're kind of taking away the possibilities for graduate students to do both kind of like really engaged theoretical work and also practical skills that they might then deploy in science shops. So that's kind of the first question. And then the second one is really quick.
Those sound like two questions.
No, that's one question. And then the second question is...
Let me start with that one.
My second one was better.
Maybe more interesting for you.
Okay, wait, so something about like the science shop, and does that...
I'm just wondering about the possibilities of... I hate microphones. Hear my own voice. I guess related to what Rebecca was talking about yesterday, like a kind of production of authority, and how you kind of mediate or at least overcome the idea that who is able to speak on behalf of political ecology as a discipline is not like a free and...
Yeah, well, I think we need to disrupt that, you know? Yes, exactly. I think that's also really, it is problematic because it sort of doesn't leave a lot of room for any of us to sort of feel that like they could speak to these larger public, you know, issues of public interest or public concern. And it's not that we necessarily we speak based on our own experience. So, you know, we've been doing our own research, and we know a lot about our research, obviously, you know. So if something happens to sort of arise where you recognize there's a need to sort of speak to, you know, adaptation in, like, you know, low-lying island nations, then that's your opportunity, and you feel confident to do that because you've recognized that, you know, your colleagues also do that. That's sort of now something that political ecologists can do, and it's not necessarily, you know, we have to wait for one particular, you know, white man to sort of speak for the discipline, but we can all do it. So, I mean, yes, we don't, currently, there doesn't seem to be a lot of, it's not something that we expect, but I don't feel like it's something, I feel like that's something we need to change, or, you know, confront.
So we have time for one more question, and this was the first hand I saw.
Sorry. Thanks, Tracy. I learned a lot from the presentation. I wanted to ask sort of a question that was touched on over here more explicitly, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about politics of alliance, especially with regards to organizations that claim to be representatives of indigenous populations. And indigeneity is a contested process that often in many parts of the world is corporatized. So I was wondering how you develop a critical relationship with populations while still aligning with particular political struggles that are very much worthwhile.
Yeah, and that's a really, really, that's an excellent question. And, you know, I agree. I mean, I've worked with indigenous communities in southern Mexico, and I recognize the politics are really challenging to navigate. And, you know, we're actually, at least let me just speak to the Climate Alliance Mapping Project. We haven't, as the University of Arizona, we're not necessarily creating this alliance, right? This alliance has been underway and sort of being developed or sort of supported through Amazon Watch and the Sierra Club. And so it already exists. So we're really sort of supporting these organizations through this map making process. I wouldn't say that, you know, again, this is very new. We only started this Climate Alliance project in September, in August, September. So it's not like I don't have a lot of, I can't say a lot about sort of, you know, how this is going to sort of turn out, but it's just that we're not actively sort of going out and creating the alliances and finding folks in indigenous peoples. They're just already, they already are part of this. But I do think that paying attention to ethics, especially in relation to indigenous populations, is, you know, of utmost importance. And, you know, on this team, we also have two other faculty members. One is in American Indian Studies, so it's done a lot of work with indigenous peoples in the United States. We also have a woman who is Jamie Lee, and so that was Ben Columbi. We also have Jamie Lee, who's in the School of Information, who's done a lot of work also with indigenous peoples, especially around digital storytelling, and she does a lot of work around this idea of decolonizing methodologies. So we are very attuned and attentive as much as possible to some of those issues. But again, we're not actively creating those alliances, but that's really a great question. Thank you.
Again, unfortunately, we're out of time. Can we get one more round of applause for